Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is Sunday, day 318 of TowerGate, January the 21st, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in. So much to cover today and so very little time to do it. So with that, let's get to it. Time is of the essence. I want to start off today by talking about a very strange sort of article that was written by Paul Speery of the New York Post. A lot of people are commenting on this and taking a look at this. He is claiming that Uncle Bob, the executioner, Robert Mueller, has hired Fusion GPS to continue his Russia investigation. I kid you not. Now, for those of you who don't know, the New York Post is a pretty credible paper. It's been around forever. It's obviously more to the center right than the Washington Post or the New York Times, but the New York Post would not just run an article like this, especially with Paul Speery. Paul Speery has been a reporter in Washington, an investigative journalist for over 20 some odd years. He's written for almost every major publication you can think of, from Time to Newsweek. He's had his articles published by just about every major paper over the past more than 2 decades. He is not known as a guy who puts out crap and sensationalism or anything like that. So, we're not talking about the National Enquirer here. We're talking about Paul Speery of the New York Post. He would not write this story unless he's got some sources or evidence to back it up. I mean, this guy's got a very long career as a fairly well-respected, right down the middle of the road journalist. He calls them as he sees them. I look at the New York Post a couple of times a week, and I read his and a couple other articles that'll be posted up there at the New York Post. It's a small paper. It doesn't get a lot of news because it's in a highly liberal area of the country in New York, where the Washington Post and the New York Times pretty much dominate. But the New York Post is still a credible paper, and they don't do clickbait. They haven't really gone to that point. They'll probably get there, but at this point, the New York Post and Paul Speery would not just throw this out there to get some clickbait or something like that. It just doesn't add up. So I think we have to give this some serious consideration. My guess is some members of Congress have seen this, and they're probably wanting to look into this, maybe speak with Mr. Speery, maybe find out who his sources may be or how confident he is, and to speak with him to make sure he didn't just throw this out there to get some headlines. It's not his style to do it. It's certainly not what the editors at the New York Post would let get by them. Something like this would not get by the editors at the New York Post. They would say, when he came in with this story, before they ran it, they would say, hey, you're saying that Robert Mueller has hired Confusion GPS to continue the Russia investigation? Can you prove that? Have you got some sources on that? Because I want to know who they are and what it is. See, this is a very interesting story. It needs to be looked at, and I'm sure people are looking at it. But there you go. For those of you who have not heard this, there it is. Paul Speery, New York Post. Mueller has hired Confusion GPS to continue the Russia investigation. Absolutely extraordinary if this is true. How in the world can this possibly be true? How can it be false? My oh my. Let's move on. In Glenn Simpson's testimony to the Senate, his lawyer, Mr. Levy, stated that, quote, someone was already killed over the dossier, unquote. Now, a lot of people are suggesting, oh, well, that must have been this former KGB guy, this Russian KGB guy named Oleg Ivorkinin. Oleg Ivorkinin was this former Russian KGB guy who turned up dead. He died. He was found in his car the day, I believe, after Christmas in 2016, I believe, or 15. It was either 2015 or 2016. And a lot of people are saying this was connected to the release of the dossier. It's never been proven. No one really knows. But, you have to remember, in Russia, with so many of these former KGB guys. They're all connected to the Russian mafia, which is 10 times worse than even the American mafia in the 1930s. There's dozens and dozens of hits like this that go on by the Russian mafia every day. So there's never been any really evidence to corroborate this. But when you take a look at the statement Mr. Levy said, he didn't state it was this Russian guy. He didn't state who it was. He just said that there's already been someone killed as a result of this dossier. Now, when you take a look at that, and then when you take a look at the statements that were made by Donna Brazil about Seth Rich and how she was fearing for her life, and how she was closing the curtains and ducking under couches and various other things, afraid of a sniper or afraid of being killed like Seth Rich, it begins to make you question this just a little deeper. And it makes you wonder if it's possible that Seth Rich maybe wasn't killed so much for the fact that he got his hands on a lot of the emails that we saw during the WikiLeaks releases. That may have tipped them off to him. But by then, he had already downloaded this stuff and probably had already transferred it to a third party or to WikiLeaks. Nothing they could do to stop that, except for to go ahead and put in place the operation to try to cover it up. And we don't have time to go into all that. We've done it before. But the point is that maybe Seth Rich discovered something else. Maybe Seth Rich discovered Fusion GPS and the work that they were doing. Maybe that's what Seth Rich had tapped into that got him killed. The process is underway to release the memo. Now, I called 3 times. I called both my senators and my congressmen to encourage them to release the memo. I know many of you called as well. The memo is going to be released. Now, the process takes about 2 to 3 weeks. It can actually go a little faster. There's also a bad rumor that's circulating around that says that Trump could declassify it and go ahead and release it. That is not true, because if you read the Constitution, you will find in there things related to the separation of powers. The president could not declassify this document, the memo, because it does not belong to the executive branch. It belongs to the legislative branch, that being the House Intelligence Committee. They are the owners of this. Now, if Trump wanted to, the executive branch could request a transfer of ownership of the document to come to the executive branch, and then he could declassify it, but that would require more steps and take actually more time. The quickest, most efficient way to get this released is the way that they're doing it, to have the the House Intel Committee vote on it, get enough votes to declassify it, then it goes to the president, where he has 5 days to act on it. And the very first person that sees it before it goes to the president is the chief of staff. He sits down with various people from intelligence and things like that. They determine that there's no problem with it being released, it compromising any investigations or compromising any sources or anything like that. Once it's been shown that it's not really going to cause any problems with that, then it goes to the president, and sometime within that 5-day period of time, he must authorize the release or refuse the release. And of course, we're pretty sure that the president would authorize the release once it's gone through John Kelly and the intelligence people there. Now, what is going on here? There's a bigger game at play here. A much bigger game at play. And it's Devin Nunes. Devin Nunes is setting up his arch rival, Peter Schiff, the Democrats, and the liberal media, because he knows what they're going to do. He already knows. Nunes thought about this, when he thought about, we'll release this memo. We'll just put this memo together, and then we'll have to have it released. Well, he knew immediately, as soon as he would do that, that the liberal media, Peter Schiff and his allies, Democrats, were going to come out and question the memo itself, question the authenticity of it, question the sources. In fact, here's a quote already from Peter Schiff. Peter Schiff has already stated, quote, that the memo is profoundly misleading. It's got talking points drafted by Republicans' staff members, and it's meant to attack the FBI and their handling of the investigation, unquote. This is what Peter Schiff has said. This is the talking point that the Democrats and the media, the left-wing media, will follow. They are going to immediately attack Nunes and the Republicans on the committee and Trump for releasing the memo, and just basically say, oh, it's just a bunch of stuff the Republicans put together to try to attack the FBI, to try to distract from the investigation into Trump-Russia, blah, 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 blah. This is going to be their defense strategy to try to discredit the memo. Now, Devin Nunes knows this. This is why he's setting them up, because he knows that it's not just this 4-page summary memo that people need to see. Devin Nunes knows that what people need to see is all the intelligence from all the hearings that they had, all the people they interviewed, all the documents they received that were used to make up this memo. Nunes knew that he was going to face this opposition, and he knew what the defensive strategy would be. This is all a setup, because now the Democrats and Peter Schiff are playing right into Nunes' hands. Because what he's going to do is they're going to release the memo, and then out is going to come the defensive attacks on Nunes and the Republican members of that committee that put it together, the summary memo. They're going to question all of it and say it's all just talking points put together by Republicans. It doesn't reflect the actual facts. That is going to be the reason that Nunes is going to use to say, well, if you're questioning the facts that we used to put together the summary memo, then I guess the only thing that we can do to defend ourselves and prove that that is not the case is to release all the documents, all the transcripts from all the witnesses, so that the American people can see the evidence that was used to create the memo. Journalists will then be able to research it and study it and pore over it, and it will all become public. All the evidence and all the documents that were used to create the memo will then be released. That is what the real game is here. Nunes is setting up Schiff and his allies, and they're taking the bait. So not only are we going to get the release of the 4-page summary memo in time, we are going to get all of it, my friends, all the documents, all the testimony, every bit of it. And it will be because Schiff and his allies fell into the trap, questioned the authority of the document, the legitimacy of the memo, and they will have no choice. Nunes will have no choice but to come out and say, okay, well, you're questioning all the information. We'll go ahead and let you see everything we used that went into creating this 4-page memo. So now you can't question the integrity of the memo or the evidence that was used to put it together. Well done, Chairman Nunes. Well done. He knows how the liberals think. He knows how Peter Schiff operates. He's a snake, and Nunes knows it. And now he's been set up like a bowling pin. Watch the pins fall in the weeks to come. You heard it here first. Thank you very much. For the past week and a half, I've been talking about the 99-page FISA court document that reveals private contractors access the NSA database via the FBI systems. Have I not? Yesterday, former U.S. Attorney Joe DeGeneva did an interview with the Daily Caller's political writers, and he talked about this. He even stated that Devin Nunes is aware of it and believes that Fusion GPS and CrowdStrike were the two contractors that got the access. About a week and a half ago, we learned that that from this 99-page FISA court document, stated right there in the document that, and their findings were that there was unlawful activity going on with the FISA 70217 searches and queries. And they said right there in that FISA court document, the 99-page document, that there were third parties, private contractors that were given access to the NSA database via the FBI systems. Now I've been wondering why no one's been talking about this. No one on Fox, most other journalists, most other YouTubers. I seem to be the only one talking about this. But now it appears that Joe diGenova, and keep in mind he was a former U.S. attorney who worked both in the DOJ and the FBI as a U.S. attorney, worked with both. He is married to Victoria Tensing, the female attorney who is the attorney for Mr. Campbell, William F. Campbell, the FBI informant. They're husband and wife. And Joe diGenova is pretty regularly on the Sean Hannity show. So I am predicting that sometime before this upcoming week is up, Mr. diGenova is going to go on Fox, probably with Hannity, either on his radio or TV show, and he is going to disclose this fact. So by the end of this week, everyone is going to know what we've all known for over a week and a half now, that Fusion GPS, at least Fusion GPS, was granted access to FISA 70217 queries via the FBI systems. That's a major, major bombshell. And I've been wondering why no one's been talking about it. I mean, it's public source information. You can read this FISA court document for yourself. I did. Took about an hour and a half, but I read it all, and it's right there. And now Joe diGenova is saying that he knows it as well. He's also saying Devin Nunes knows it. He's also saying that Devin Nunes, we didn't really know. It doesn't name the sources in the FISA document. It just says that third parties and individual contractors had this access. But apparently, according to Joe diGenova, Devin Nunes knows this, and he believes that the contractors were Confusion GPS and CrowdStrike. This is going to be one of the major bombshells that will hit the mainstream of thought in this upcoming week. They're about a week and a half behind us, but at least they're catching up. diGenova is also stating that Mike Rogers, the NSA director, briefed Trump at the Trump Tower, and that is why the Trump team moved out of the Trump Tower the next day. Again, something else that I mentioned about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, Joe diGenova is now saying the exact same thing. That in fact, it's about 99% sure that Mike Rogers told Trump at Trump Tower that he was being surveilled, and that's why they moved the next day the Trump team out of Trump Tower. So, you can expect this week, this will make its way into the news. Expect Hannity to interview diGenova before the week is up. Now, I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes, the final 15 minutes of this video, talking about something that's been a bone in my throat since the dossier was released on January 10th, 2017, and I read it the next day several times. But in my very first reading of it, I thought, man, this doesn't look like anything. Remember, I was in the military, I was in a nuclear unit, I was in communications, I handled thousands and thousands of pieces of classified information, as well as these types of reports. Now, the ones that we were handling were training reports, but so the information in them was, of course, fraudulent because it was for training purposes, but the makeup and the outline and the way that these reports were done have a certain look to them. I've also reviewed many classified, actual classified, declassified intelligence documents, as many of you have, and you know what they look like. They almost always also cite references and sources, and they don't make predictions or assumptions. They are only fact-based documents. These are what intelligence reports are. When you read the dossier, it doesn't look like anything that any intelligence professional would have put together. And Christopher Steele was an intelligence professional. I smelled a rat from day one. And I said back in January of 2017 after reading it, I don't think Christopher Steele was the guy who wrote this. I stand by that. And I'm the only one, as far as I know, saying that. Everyone is still out there saying, yes, well, Christopher Steele was the author of the dossier. I take issue with that. I take issue with that. I believe he had a role in the dossier, but I've told you what that role is. He was to be the launderer, the laundryman, the cleaner. I believe that the document was created at the central collection point, which would have been Confusion GPS, by Simpson, his wife Mary Jacoby, and Nellie Orr, working with Nellie Orr's husband, Bruce Orr, who was number 4 in counterintelligence and an inside man at the NSD, the National Security Division of the DOJ. He was the one that provided them continued access to the FISA 702.17 query system after Rogers shut him down. I believe that all this information was created right there within Confusion GPS using these central players that we've all talked about, which would include Luce Lisa Page and Peter Benstrokenis, Bruce Orr, probably Bill Priestap, Benstrokenis' boss and the head of counterintelligence. And I believe that they put the document together. They sent it to Christopher Steele for 2 reasons. Number 1, for him to essentially be the cleaner, the guy who they could send it to, use his credentials to sell the document, but also because he had the access and the credibility that he could pass it along to British intelligence, any other intelligence agency he wanted, especially FBI and CIA. He's the guy who could move it, because I needed someone who could do 2 things: give the dossier credibility and to be able to disseminate it to places where Fusion GPS could not, because Fusion GPS is actually operating as a client for the Hillary Rodham Clinton campaign. They couldn't be seen as also being the ones to propagate the intelligence. They needed someone else to do that work. I think they went to Christopher Steele and said, hey, you want to make a couple $100,000 real easy? All you have to do is let us send you this stuff. You send it back to us through a typical email chain. We'll get it to you one way. You send it back to us another way. Then we want you to try to pass it along to the intelligence communities and things and such. I think he thought this was an easy payday, that all he had to do was participate in this, pick up a couple $100,000, wouldn't even have to break a sweat doing it. His role was very, very limited. He didn't expect Hillary to lose. And he also was an anti-Trump person who supported Hillary, so they probably said, yeah, and this will help defeat Trump. He was probably right on board for a couple $100,000 and the opportunity to do some mischief. He never knew that he would end up in the situation he's in now, because as we can see in the civil lawsuits, or whether it's being asked to testify in Congress or anywhere else, he doesn't want any part of having to testify or back the dossier. In fact, he's backing away for it. He's now saying it was only limited intelligence and that the information could only possibly be true. He's backing away from it in the civil suits, and he doesn't want to speak to any members of Congress. He doesn't want to back the document that he was out there selling so hard. It's because he doesn't own it, because he had very little to do with it. His role was supposed to be very limited. He was never supposed to get himself into this pickle he's now in. The main narrative that Steele was the author of the dossier, and of course you know my opinion, that Steele was not, that Steele was just there to give the credibility to the dossier and to be able to feed it to British intelligence, the FBI and the CIA. Senator Magoo, who is head of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Steele, I contend, was only the cleaner that laundered the intel, then became the salesman as the face of the dossier. And I am now going to present to you my evidence for this. Pay attention if you're watching. I know you folks over there, you producers for Sean Hannity, watch my videos. Tell Sean to stop passing this around along with everybody else that Christopher Steele was the primary author of the dossier. He wasn't, and now I'm going to give you the reasons why. We know that Fusion GPS was accessing the NSA database from November 25th, 15th to April 18th, 2016, getting that intel that would end up in the dossier. Steele was not brought in until May the 2016th. May of 2016. long after a lot of the initial information was already cultivated. As Mike Whitney pointed out, the first series of memos throughout the summer were about perversion and blackmail. Salacious National Enquirer tone to it. Then the last memo comes out, and it's a document that's about cyber espionage and has a totally different tone than the tone that was used in the initial memos. And the writing style is much different. Steele said in a civil suit in the UK in his deposition that he used intermediaries and never spoke directly to the sources. Also, Steele says in his depositions that he did not go out and pursue the information and sources. They came to him. Quote from his deposition, "Not sought, only received." Unquote. Steele also stated that the final memo that he did not confirm it, and it was raw intelligence. Steele is backing away from the dossier, saying it is only possible that the intelligence is legit and true. Steele's attorneys are doing all they can to keep Steele from having to testify to Congress or in any of the 7 civil suits that are pending. Why? But if you analyze the actual dossier, it is a syntactical nightmare with a random use of punctuation. Steele was educated at Cambridge and was a writer on the school newspaper there. He's intelligent, educated, and he has written many reports for various governments, intelligence reports. This document does not read like an intelligence document, and it looks like it was either written by different people, more than one, or it was written by a schizophrenic. Many of the sentences have grammatical errors and read like they were written by someone not fully fluent in English. Steele is a master of the English language. Words like is, the, a are missing. These words in English show the possessive in a sentence, but in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, these words are not used. For instance, in America we say we have to go to the hospital. In Europe they say we have to go to hospital. They don't use the. And as the way that we arrange our sentences in the West compared to Europe, especially Eastern Europe, we may say something like, well, I have to go to the store today. But in Europe they would say, today I have to go to the store. These things are clear to me. I lived in Europe for 3 fucking years. I know how they talk. Don't bullshit me, Mr. Steele. The document is a mess. It lacks proper punctuation, no commas, periods, or hyphens, or italics. It misuses the possessive. I know English. I had to write a lot of papers in college, and I didn't like it. Many papers. All that editing, all that writing, didn't like it. The document is a mess, both in content and in style. Why hasn't the media noticed this and pointed it out? It's obvious. I mean, these are journalists. They had to take a lot of writing classes, did they not? Read the dossier. You'll see what I'm talking about. Former KGB agent Konstantin Przewozinski read the dossier and said it was foolish speculation with no references and that it is not an intelligence document of any kind. And he said, I was laughing when I read it. The dossier makes assertions that sound like democratic talking points. For example, it says at one point, such as pointing out, quote, Trump's unfitness for office. When you do an intelligence brief, the people receiving your intelligence information are not looking for your opinions. They want facts and they want references. Everything has to be referenced and sourced or it has no intelligence value. Nothing of the sort is evident in the dossier. If Steele wrote this, then Cambridge needs to rescind his degree. The authors of the dossier misspell Alpha Bank. They spell Alpha Bank A-L-F-H-A, but Alpha Bank is spelled A-L-F-A. Would Christopher Steele make that kind of mistake? I don't think so. Nellie Orr might. Conclusion. The dossier was written by more than one person. One or more writers were either Russian or Eastern European, and Steele or Simpson Fusion GPS chose not to edit the correct the language and the writing errors. Or some writer or writers were American and were trying to make it look like it was written by Russians or Eastern Europeans. Maybe that's why they brought in Nellie Orr, who speaks Russian. Did Nellie Orr write the dossier? Did they take that intelligence they were getting from those illegal FISA 17 queries, get that stuff, then she sits around with Strozik and Page and her hubby and Simpson and Jacoby, and they put the story together, and then she puts the Russian type language to it so it looks like it was a Russian, and then they send this to Steele, and then he turns around and feeds it to the intel community, and then back in a loop to Fusion GPS. That's what it looks like to me. Steele allegedly sent his work to Fusion GPS, his client. But at the same time, he was giving this stuff to British intelligence, the FBI, and the CIA. There's one way to prove my point. We need to compare. A little comparative analysis may be required. We need to take a look at the documents that Christopher Steele gave the FBI, that he gave them himself, and then we need to compare that to what Fusion GPS gave to their sources to see if the finished product from Fusion GPS is the same as the product from Christopher Steele. I'm telling you, Christopher Steele was not the author of the dossier. He was the laundryman, the cleaner, the face, the salesman, to give it credibility. I bet he didn't write a damn thing in that dossier. That's my reasons. Read it for yourself. It's hard to read almost because there's so many errors in it, and grammatical errors. It's either written by someone who is Russian or Eastern European, or it's written by someone who's American and pretending to write like someone to make it look like it was Russian or Eastern European. And that's my guess. That's exactly what I think. Nellie, you watching, Nellie? Maybe you're doing a ham radio broadcast right now. Still working for Fusion GPS, who's now working for Uncle Bob. Who knows? Prediction. In the next few weeks and months to come, watch for an epidemic, a rash of suicides. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Sunday edition of TowerGate, Day 318, January the 21st, 2018. Enjoy your evening. See you.